You know, when it comes to the grand and epic scale of Pink Floyd's back catalogue, I don't think any other album fits their title more than this, The Division Bell. This last album by Pink Floyd is just this, divisive amongst Pink Floyd fans, as it is viewed with either contempt for being nothing more than a David Gilmour solo album with Pink Floyd members present, or it's applauded at the vast and spacious guitar melodies within, likely depending on how you feel about David Gilmour. On this episode of Retro Reviews, we delve into The Division Bell for its 30th anniversary and discuss the music on it, hidden messages, and how Pink Floyd became the first band to use the internet to help promote this album. I hope I don't need to talk about this band's history. I'm sure most of you who are viewing this know who Pink Floyd are in the least, but if you don't, then let me give you a quick rundown. The band formed in 1967, fired their original guitarist because he went off the rails due to drugs and mental issues, and then was replaced with David Gilmour, aka this guy. They made this album, which everyone should know by the cover, even if you haven't heard of the record, and it sold about 1 billion copies and became the 4th highest selling record ever in existence. They also released this album, and of course until the bass player and founding member Roger Waters left a few years later. But they continued for another decade, led by Gilmour, which brings us to this record. Now of course I glossed over a lot, but if you want an in-depth video, I'm sure there are more than a few out there which you can watch and learn about. Instead, we are reliving the moments that led up to this album's release. Pink Floyd and prog rock in general was a sound from a bygone era in the 70s that was killed off by punk rock acts such as the Ramones and Sex Pistols. In fact, a famous story revolves around Sid Vicious meeting Johnny Rotten when he saw his shirt that read, "I hate Pink Floyd." Even moving into the 80s, Pink Floyd's last Roger Waters era album, The Final Cut, was regarded as pure crap with almost no redeeming tracks, or at best, The Wall Part 2. The Wall Part 2, the boring tracks. And then Roger left and he did his own solo material. If speculation on the band's demise was skeptical, it was made pretty apparent when the band did a no-show at the Live Aid concert in 1985, which was pretty much the confirmation needed that the band was done. Despite the rumour mill running rampant, the rest of the band went into the studio to record A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which was released in 1987, and while David Gilmour copped some flack for carrying on with the Pink Floyd name, as well as a lawsuit, they did so in a more pop-orientated direction, as was evident by their big single from the album Learning to Fly. But the album was met with its fair share of criticisms too, and found some lackluster sales for Pink Floyd. Now the band could have called it a day then and there, but instead they were content to up the ante. David Gilmour bought a boat that was originally built in 1911 to fit an orchestra for daytime river performances, and he would retrofit it to accommodate a studio so that the band could record while looking at views instead of a windowless and dark concrete prison. This boat was called the Astoria, and while it helped with the bands in the previous album, the band were now in the mindset to write one last effort, and so the pieces were set for Pink Floyd to write their last album. There were only 2 singles released from this album, although one is a split single, so maybe that's a technicality? Take It Back was the first single from the album, and to be honest, it's quite a forgettable song. I mean, it's nice enough, and I'm not going to skip it when I hear it, but this tune just kind of exists. It doesn't stand out on this album, but maybe that's a trait that this record has. The song itself is about Mother Nature and how, despite what we do as a human race to affect her, she will ultimately win and claim the planet again through whatever process. Essentially, it's a song about looking after the environment, or we won't have a place to stay. Goddamn hippies. High Hopes is hands down the best Pink Floyd song post The Wall, and I don't care what anyone else says. It's a very profound song in the band's catalogue. It was not only the last song on the album, but the last song the band recorded from these sessions, and was done so on purpose. And that purpose was to show the band closing out a chapter. After all, the song is about Pink Floyd itself, and through the transition of time faded by infighting and a world that won't stop, and it also contains a few Easter eggs within. The song begins with bells
and tubular bells.
No, not those bells. These bells. And these are the same ones that can be heard at the beginning of their song Fat Old Son from the Atom Heart Mother album, and it is a great way to kick things off with this callback. By the second line in the song, the band are discussing their feats in this modern world. When they mention a world of magnets and miracles, our thoughts stray constantly and without boundary, referencing the computer age and how in preparation for this record's release, the band would still blur the lines of art and music by utilising the internet to help promote this album in a first for music. They didn't do this by placing ads on Google's homepage. After all, Google wasn't even invented yet. Instead, they placed clues on Usenet, alluding to the album and a competition where a winner would get a prize, and that prize was an acre of trees planted in their name. Bloody hippies. Ultimately, no one completed the task, and this was most likely due to the grand total of 40 people having access to the internet at the time, but you have to admit it, this was a far out idea for the early 90s. I mean, this is before Windows 95 dropped and the world would start to integrate themselves with the household computers and utilize the internet itself. Also, Internet Explorer didn't exist yet. What leaps and bounds this must have been for a band that was part of the flower power generation to this point in history. The song details the optimism the band had when they initially set out all those years ago with high hopes before becoming, well, jaded with not only the music industry and the touring lifestyle, but each other. All this despite coming across as a nice slow waltz-paced tune, albeit delivered with an air of pessimistic lyrics by David Gilmour. The song also ends with a brief phone call.
Is that Charlie? Hello, Charlie. Great.
This exchange takes place between Pink Floyd's manager Steve O'Rourke and Charlie Gilmour, David's son, who wanted to be on the album. On a different note, this song would be covered by a symphonic metal band, Nightwish, for their compilation album of a similar name, Highest Hopes. And the song was played as the finale for their concerts on this tour, which is intriguing, and while I like the band, I can't say I like this version of the song. The video clip that accompanies this song was also poignant, as to be expected with Pink Floyd, and it's reflective of the source material. It begins with a man standing next to his car in a field facing away from the camera and reflecting the times passed by before cutting to several interjections of imagery used in many different ways, such as guitars flowing down a stream, or a kid holding a giant teddy bear, or whatever these huge capes are flowing in the wind.
No capes!
There are also more Easter eggs here with some footage from Cambridge where the band grew up and played their early gigs together as a band, and even a huge Syd Barrett bust is seen being carried away by what appears to be pallbearers as if to show the loss of one of their own at this point, except for the fact that he was still very much alive during this record. But it's symbolic, I guess, and fits the imagery of the album cover. So I'll give it to him on this one. Now, when this song was released, it also had a B-side, Keep Talking, from the album, and this song features guest vocals by, well, none other than Stephen Hawkins, as can be heard by his signature computer vocals, or rather it samples his speech for his parts anyway.
For millions of years, mankind lived just like the animals.
It's another great song that Gilmour just lets loose when he needs to and flows well to include a solid transition into Richard Wright's keyboard sections on this track. Gilmour chose to include Stephen Hawkins' vocals on this song, which was part of a speech that Stephen did for a BT television ad and caused Gilmour to cry. I'm not joking. Goddamn hippies. It certainly seems like the song was the inspiration for the album cover, featuring those two heads facing each other, and may just be the star comparison for that High Hopes song, and it's such a perfect choice for its B-side. This is difficult to answer because deep cuts are songs typically overlooked in a band's catalogue that are worthy of listening to, and I feel that there are quite a few on here. Given the band's megalithic status at this point, it can be said that the entire album is overshadowed by their past. Even the major single High Hopes. But I digress, let's have a stab at this. I feel somewhat like playing devil's advocate here, and despite my standing on this album, I feel that the record may not truly have the deep cuts worthy of such. I mean, there are a lot of good songs that I wouldn't skip, but to hear them amongst a live setting would feel like a lull in any setlist rather than an additional surprise. Still, I know that Maroon gets a lot of hype, and while a decent song, it's merely an extended David Gilmour guitar solo jam that made its way over onto the record. And while it showcases, of course, the craftsmanship of Gilmour utilising his tool and swinging it as he only can do, I think that the track is okay, but unnecessary, to be honest. Instead, I want to point out the songs Take It Back and Poles Apart. Detractors for Take It Back would be quick to point out how this song just sounds derivative of their song Run Like Hell, but I like the use of this riff in a different format. I think it suits Gilmour's style well on here with its poppy influence, and I have to wonder if the band took cues from Genesis and by extension Phil Collins for this tune. As for Poles Apart, this feels like Pink Floyd of old in their early days, sounding like something from Adam Hart and Mother in a more polished, like veneer and updated sound. The band come together quite well here to perfectly vibe off each other, and Nick's drumming helps bring the song together while allowing, well, space for the song to breathe, of course. Also, the use of the mid-song shift in the melodies is perfect to allow for the transition into faster-paced tunes. It just feels so Pink Floyd-esque here, and I'm not sure why more Pink Floyd fans don't talk about this song more. I guess that's why they call these songs deep cuts. So first, a random fact about this album. Bob Ezrin was the producer for the record. He would also go on to be the producer for Deftones for their record Saturday Night Wrist. Something for you to consider. Also, the album cover was handled by Storm Thorgerson, who had worked with the band for decades, and of course was the creative mind who made the cover of Dark Side of the Moon. The statues on here are real and were designed by Keith Breeden and stand as tall as a double-decker bus. A few of these statues were made, with one being made of metal and the other being made of stone. The metal statues have even toured by themselves, being part of Pink Floyd exhibitions, and were part of Pink Floyd's exhibition and part of the Ohio Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a while. But perhaps they were most famously seen in this photo here on top of a roof of a building. Although a weird sight, this was part of Pink Floyd's exhibit and was just the storage for these large statues. Now, as for the album, if this record sound is that of a death rattle from a fractured band, then it sounds very joyous and uplifting in certain parts, all things considered, I guess. But I guess that's also because of the fact that Roger Waters has been out of the picture for years now, and everyone can finally relax. I guarantee that what I know on the Roger Waters saga, while with Pink Floyd, is rather limited, and for most of the part it has been speculation about what happened in the band camp until certain biographies were released or interviews happened, but most of these were after the fact. What was certain at the time was that Roger Waters was a difficult person to work with, and the band seemed to have found an air of relaxation on this album. That being said, I get the feeling that Waters helped challenge the members to doing or writing something better, and it is lacking on that part, but given the status of the final cut, I'm glad that it evolved. Although it sounds pedestrian and simple as far as Pink Floyd's albums went, it's still full of some great tracks, and the whole album just ebbs and flows so well, unlike some other records of theirs, so it doesn't feel like it drags its feet anywhere in particular. For me, this is a true album you can just press play and just go for a drive to. Now, some might say that this isn't a true Pink Floyd album, but a precursor to David Gilmour's solo works, and I guess there is a point to be made regarding that. But I would counter by saying that Gilmour made Pink Floyd the band it is famous for being, and is an adamant figure in their lineup, which he was part of, and his next solo album wouldn't release for another 10 years. Compare this to Roger Waters, who punched out 3 albums in the 10 years after he left Pink Floyd, but he had to do so considering that he was now a solo musician. Look, at the end of the day, Pink Floyd weren't anywhere near as successful or edgy without Roger Waters, but neither was Roger Waters as big as he makes himself out to be without Pink Floyd, and I think there is an air of bitter resentment in how things turned out in him. I know fans would be quick, of course, to mention that Roger Waters had greater success with his solo albums like Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, but to that I would say, really? It's an okay album at best. And if you want to talk live concerts, the guy makes his fortunes from playing Pink Floyd era material or The Wall every couple of years, not his solo stuff. Still, I'm not sure exactly how much of a cultural impact this album had at the time, as the material comes across as very dad rock in style, and released at a time when Nirvana and Soundgarden were all the rage. Still, I'm guessing Hollywood retroactively enjoyed this album because it does make an appearance in the Jumanji remake. Going Against the Machine, the band enjoyed some songs going #1 in multiple countries and even going double platinum before the year closed out. Woohoo! Good job, Pink Floyd. That's probably your 80th platinum record in the process. And this was before the year closed out. But this probably boils down to, well, the band being Pink Floyd. Now, of course, the band had hired a new bass player with Guy Pratt taking over the duties of Roger Waters. But they also included some touring or session musicians with Dick Parry as the saxophonist. No, I am not making this name up. Now, I'm not going to break down the technical aspects of these band members filling their roles, but I will say that these guys filled their jobs well as a bass player. He is no Roger Waters, and this is just fine for their new sound of the band, which is more suited to his warmer tones. Of course, Roger is a solid bass player, and anyone can play their lines, but coming up with the material, that's different. That's why I think the new album downplayed the bass licks of Guy, and this suits Pink Floyd well. What can I say other than I really enjoyed this album for the better part of 20 years, and Pink Floyd's quickly figured out this was it for the band. Their swan song had been sung, and it was fine. Not great, but fine. The Division Bell saw mixed reviews upon its release, with AllMusic giving the album a score of 2 out of 5, the Encyclopedia of Music giving a 3 out of 5, Entertainment Weekly giving the record a score of a D, Pace gave it a 6.1 out of 10, Pop Matters a 7 out of 10, Rolling Stone giving a 2.5 out of 5, Sputnik Music giving a 4.5 out of 5, and Uncut giving a 4 out of 5. At Radio Music, the album stands at a score of 3.25 out of 5 from over 17,000 scores, which is quite impressive. For comparison, Dookie, an album of the same year and a wildly successful and well-regarded album, sits at 3.62 from 20,000 scores. So I think that's quite the resounding success, or maybe it's from an album that has a cult following. For me, I would give this album a score of 11 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being Marooned, A Great Day for Freedom, Talk to Me, and of course High Hopes being the standout on offer. This is a bonus fact, but I just wanted to throw it in here. But Max Cavalera of Sepultura and Soulfly fame regards the Division Bell as his favourite Pink Floyd record, and he cites David Gilmour and his guitar work on this record as the inspiration for his choice. So make of that as you will. The Division Bell was never going to reach the highs from past albums, but it was never meant to either. Instead, it gave the band members one last chance to close off that chapter in their lives that meant so much for so many, and also to get one big payout before the lawyers came and picked apart the carcass. High Hopes is an amazing closing track, not just for the album, but for the band and their story, and the song is an underrated gem that shows new age Pink Floyd can still write insanely good material. The other massive factor to come out of this was the tour and subsequent live release called Pulse. It saw the band having to rehearse inside of a hangar at the Norton Air Force Base, and some of the shows on this tour also played The Dark Side of the Moon in full, the first time since 1975 since the band had done so. Another massive thing to consider was the scale of this tour, where the band had 3 different stages that would be set up in 3 different cities, like leapfrogging from each location to each location due to their vast size. And lasers. Holy crap, look at the lasers. Yeah, they went all out on this tour, and it would become the highest grossing concert in its era for good reason too. Ultimately, this album does what other prior Pink Floyd records don't do, and that is to not be polarizing for their themes or music. Instead, the fans kind of sit in unison in regards to their views on this one. For example, I could say that I love 70s era Pink Floyd, but then I forget Obscured by Clouds exists, a soundtrack record that is hot garbage, and most fans would agree. No, the Division Bell finds fans on any side of the fence saying it wasn't a great effort, but it wasn't a bad one either. It's middle of the road, it's okay, and it's the most unique aspect of this album, perhaps besides being the last Pink Floyd album until, well, 2014 rolled around, that is. And we of course saw The Endless River see a light. A series of spacey and epic recordings that were from the same sessions as the Division Bell, albeit with a few updated recordings by the remaining members at this point, and an ode for their fallen band member Richard Wright. And of course, as it stands, this is a beautiful record unto itself, but I guess that's another story for another time. For now, I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and please consider subscribing to this channel. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.